Hey, welcome back to another episode of Nomad History. You know, I often sit around thinking, man, it is wonderful that I just, with a phone, with camera, and little lights, and a stable connection to the internet, I can upload basically what is a film. Really, the history of film, as we know it today, is about only 130 years old. And the history of photography itself, again, is just little under 200 years old. And that boggles my mind. Now, why does that boggle my mind? Well, let's go through a quick history of photography to film as we know it today. So, the first photograph was taken in 1826, and it's this. This photograph was taken by Joseph Nicéphore Niépce in 1826 or 1827. And it's supposed to depict a view from his balcony in the Burgundy region of France. We can't really see much in this photograph, but there have been enhanced versions of the photograph that are not entirely based off the original, but upscaling it and adding a few features. And we can kind of see what he was looking at. And it's fascinating that this is the first artificially captured image in all of history to depict a real scene. It's mind-blowing even. Of course, there were many other technical innovations, but something that I want to talk about is something that has become such an ingrained part of modern life, the selfie. The first selfie being taken in 1839 by Robert Cornelius. And here it is. Look at that handsome boy. He's just loving that little photograph of himself. It's amazing to think that going into the modern day, probably billions of people in the world take millions and millions of selfies every single day collectively. Of course, the modern cinema industry would be nowhere without the ability to record sound. This first audio recording was done by Édouard-Léon Scots de Martinville, who recorded a really eerie rendition of the folk song Au clair de la lune. And here it is. As creepy as it sounds, it's just crazy to think of snippets of audio that we can hear from a past time. This sound, made on April 9th, 1860, still exists with us today. So yeah, the recording is a bit creepy, but it's a sound that we managed to preserve. And it makes me really think towards the future, just how many sound bites have been preserved, let's say in the last year alone, that we'll be able to hear 100 years from now. So yeah, where would the film industry be without moving pictures? That was something that was put into practice in 1878 by Eadweard Muybridge, who, taking 24 cameras, managed to capture 24 successive images of a horse running. And taking those 24 images and playing them fast together created what we would consider the first moving picture of this horse in motion. Of course, that was still extremely primitive and also had to be artificially cobbled together afterwards. But it set up the idea for technology that would become the motion picture industry. Then in 1888, we had the first actual moving picture, where Louis Le Prince went to Leeds in United Kingdom in Yorkshire with a device that could be considered a very early motion picture camera and filmed the Roundhay garden scene. Even though it is just a bunch of people wandering around, it is the setup for what we have today, for me to be able to do this for you. And from this point, film technology would advance at an unprecedented rate. We started having the first films that had some sort of story after this, being mass-produced by the Edison Company, who really managed to perfect this technology. We had the first film with a cut 7 years later in 1895, The Execution of Mary Queen of Scots, also produced by the Edison Company. And then from there, we had the first narrative films being made. Even to this day, we don't actually know what the first narrative film is, because it seems that so many people at different times managed to think of this idea of creating a sequence of images from this first cut into creating a narrative, splicing together different scenes to tell the audience what to feel and what to do. We get our first docudrama series, The Dreyfus Affair. We get A Daylight Robbery, which is about just a simple story about a robbery. Then in 1912, we get what is considered today the first truly natural colour film that was shot in colour, not just edited in afterward. And that is With Our King and Queen Through India. Don't you forget, to create what we know as modern film now, we also need the audio recording. The real first sound film, with synchronized dialogue as well as sound, is The Light of New York from 1928. And then from 1928, the use of sound just becomes more and more popular. We get many classics like Dracula, Frankenstein, just so many films being synchronized with sound and then more music being added in. And then the use of color becomes more popularized until we get the first films that are truly recognisable as what we would call blockbusters and modern cinema. Honestly, the history of film is extremely fascinating, and I'm sorry it was a very abridged one, but I just wanted to appreciate how I got here. See you soon. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.